You know, it's easy to get the idea that the city of Boston has lost maybe its creative spark a little bit. This is the place that once brought America a lot of firsts. The first public park, the first subway system, the first Tea Party, the first massacre, and so on. But now whenever you hear Boston in the news, it's usually pretty uninspiring stuff by comparison. You're hearing about the mayor and how the mayor is banning white people from holiday parties, or the fact that the president of Harvard has never had an original thought in her life, or the decision by Mass General to bring back mask mandates, stuff like that. And despite all that, it would still be a mistake to say that Boston has given up on innovation. They're still doing pretty groundbreaking stuff up there, at least if you ask them. So for example, back in 2019, Suffolk County, Massachusetts, which includes the city of Boston, embarked on a first of its kind real-life social experiment. Under the leadership of their new district attorney, Rachel Rollins, Suffolk County decided to stop prosecuting criminals who were accused of most nonviolent misdemeanors, including disorderly conduct and shoplifting. And the cops would, arrest the shoplifters, and then the prosecutors would just let them off the hook. And this was a relatively new strategy for a major American city at the time, because remember, this was before the racial reckoning of 2020, as they called it. The theory was that these kinds of prosecutions did more harm than good, and it's better to refer these criminals to counseling sessions instead of throwing them in prison. Disincentives, the idea that a negative response to a certain behavior will result in less of that behavior, is a basic rule of psychology and one of the most tried and true facts of life. But the city of Boston decided to reject everything we knew about human psychology and human behavior in favor of this new strategy. Well, how did that work out? A few years after that policy went into effect, leading researchers at major universities, including Rutgers, Texas A&M, NYU, published a lengthy paper declaring that, in fact, Boston's strategy had been a major success. They found that, quote, the recent policy change in Suffolk County imposing a presumption of non-prosecution for nonviolent misdemeanor offenses decreased the likelihood of subsequent criminal justice involvement. In other words, if you let criminals get away with shoplifting, they're less likely to get in trouble with the law in the future. And in left-wing circles, this is known as restorative justice. And officials in Boston said it was proof that their idea had worked. Success. What no one seemed to grasp at these universities is that this is the exact result you would expect when you legalize shoplifting, and it's not a good result. It's not surprising that shoplifters don't get in trouble with the law anymore if you stop prosecuting them for petty crimes. If you don't punish people for crimes, fewer people will be punished for crimes. It's like if you stopped all cancer screenings, then claimed that cancer had been cured because no one's getting diagnosed with it anymore. The point is that Boston didn't stop people from shoplifting and committing petty crimes. In fact, if anything, when you do this, it means people will be shoplifting a lot more, because why wouldn't they? If they can get away with it, then more people will do it. And indeed, they're going to shoplift so much that it becomes impossible for businesses to stay open, which means that very quickly, so-called disadvantaged communities will lose access to convenience stores and pharmacies. They'll become even more disadvantaged, which is supposedly the opposite of restorative justice. You're not restoring anything whatsoever. We don't have to speculate about this. All we have to do is look at what's happening right now in Boston. Walgreens has just announced that it's closing its fourth location in Boston in just the past year. 4 locations closed in just a year. And every single time, it's been a low-income community, mostly Black or Hispanic, that has been affected. And this time, they're closing a store in the mostly Black neighborhood of Roxbury. Now, you might think that this development would prompt some reflection from the media in Boston, or from the politicians, or from activists in the local community. You might think that they'd ask whether allowing people to rob stores is, in fact, maybe a bad idea. But that's not what's happening. Instead, we're getting reports like this one from CBS Boston. Listen.
The store shelves are empty and the signs are up, alerting customers that this Roxbury Walgreens will be closed for good at the end of the month.
How are they supposed to go get their medicine?
It's sparking concern and outrage from residents who rely on the Warren Street drugstore in this predominantly Black neighborhood.
What happens to our seniors and our single parents that have no way to get to a Walgreens or another pharmacy anywhere near their home? And so we think it's insensitive, it's unjust.
Reverend Miniard Culpepper points to the senior housing developments just steps from the Walgreens and questions how the elderly will get their medications, especially after the pharmacy chain closed their stores in Hyde Park, Nubian Square, and Mattapan about a year ago. Walgreens says they're downsizing, but the Reverend calls it nothing short of corporate greed. Why do you think they target black and brown communities?
I think because they get no pushback. But they're now getting pushback.
Protesting alongside dozens of other frustrated customers fighting to keep this Walgreens open.
Don't we need to have something in the community to help the black, the elderly, the sick? You know what I'm saying? They can't go far.
The problem boils down to accessibility, says former Boston NAACP president turned healthcare advocate Michael Curry.
The communities where they're closing these pharmacies are communities where people are disparately impacted by disease, 2 or 3 times higher rates in cancer, diabetes, heart disease, where life expectancy can be 15, 20 years less.
While this isn't the only Walgreens or pharmacy chain set to close location in the coming weeks, Curry says it begs this question.
What is your obligation? What is your expectation as a corporate citizen to do what's right for those communities beyond what's right just for your bottom line?
Well, that question is pretty easy to answer. Walgreens, just like every other private business, has no obligation to lose money. They don't have to stay open to provide any kind of service to the local community. They're not soup kitchens. These are not charitable organizations. Their job is to make money. That's not greed. It's called economics. It's called reality. A business like Walgreens can't stay open if it's losing money. It just can't. That's why it's the government's job to make sure that there's law and order so that thugs don't just walk into Walgreens and take everything and end up shutting these stores down. But there's no sense anywhere in that entire segment that Boston's policy of encouraging shoplifting might be to blame. You can go online and watch the whole clip and if you want and see for yourself. It's just not there. They don't mention it. They essentially legalize shoplifting. Convenience stores were summarily run out of town, and the media doesn't even mention the connection between these two events. There's also no sense that Boston's recent decision to defund its police department could be playing a role. Instead, we're left with the implication that Walgreens just doesn't like black people. The argument appears to be that Walgreens should keep its business open as a charity where it keeps bleeding money in order to provide various services to the local community. But if you do some digging, it's not hard to conclude why Walgreens is shutting down this Roxbury location. Here, for example, is footage taken by a citizen journalist in Boston a couple of years ago. He films as police finally arrest a woman they caught shoplifting 3 separate times in one day. Now, watch this to get a sense of what it's like at these Walgreens locations in that area and what they're dealing with. Here it is.
That was 450. The last one I wrote. Then I wrote another one on 412. Shoplifting. I still got the stuff in the book.
Hey, sir, let me talk to you. Please, sir. Please, I haven't married up. I haven't seen anybody. Please,
This is just ridiculous.
Shoplifting is a big thing over here too, just so you guys know. It's a big problem. I know.
Big problem.
I see.
Especially when it's the same person.
I know. Trust me, I see it.
And then they want 3 times today. I got
in
2
one day
reports that I wrote last week.
The same person 3 times.
Person.
Wow.
This ain't even the other people.
Right.
This is the same person. Try to give her a be nice and let her out. Yeah, you try to be nice. Yeah.
Well, 3 times in one day. They're saying that she did it.
Like, yeah,
So that's the problem. A lot of these businesses are losing a lot of revenue because of the shoplifting thing, and a lot of people don't realize that. If you go to some of these shelves, especially in the Roxbury area, some parts of Dorchester as well, a lot of shelves are becoming empty because of shoplifting. I heard the AutoZone's having that same problem with people shoplifting in the stores. So it's not like they're making it up. It's definitely a problem. This is right over at the Walgreens, right on Washington Street.
So this is how common shoplifting became in Roxbury and the surrounding areas after Boston's big push to legalize shoplifting. The cops, don't arrest the shoplifters anymore for the most part. They released this woman several times before arresting her out of exasperation. And when they finally feel compelled to make an arrest, everyone knows it doesn't matter. The shoplifters know that they're not going to be prosecuted, so they keep on coming back. That woman will be, ripping off stores again, probably within a few hours. And that's why Walgreens is now shutting down all these stores in Boston. This is a massive problem, as the cops say in that video. According to one study, shoplifting in Boston is up roughly 40% since June of 2019, when the city's experiment began. And that's in the city overall. Okay, in neighborhoods like Roxbury, the figures are presumably a lot higher. And it's not just shoplifting that's out of control. Recently, the Boston Globe ran a story that was intended to portray portray Walgreens in a bad light and make them seem like an evil, greedy megacorp for closing their Roxbury location. But they included this information in their report, quote, "The generational impact is felt by Roxbury residents like Lucille Culpepper Jones. She doesn't see herself visiting the Columbus Avenue drugstore a mile away because she doesn't feel safe walking there alone." So this is a neighborhood that's so dangerous that elderly women don't want to go outside, and yet we're expected to believe that businesses should stay open in these kinds of neighborhoods where their stores will get robbed, their employees will get attacked, people aren't safe outside of the store, or in it would seem. And that's just an assumption that CBS and NAACP demand that you make. So naturally, they're telling everybody to protest Walgreens instead of the politicians that CBS and NAACP support, who have caused this problem. Now, of course, protesting Walgreens' decision to pull out of this neighborhood, it's a bit like protesting the laws of gravity. You can whine all you want, but basic economic principles still exist. Businesses exist to make a profit, and when they can't make a profit, they have to close down, even if they don't want to. And most businesses don't want to close locations. It's not something that they celebrate doing, but if they do it, it's probably because they had no choice. And yet the other day, the residents of Roxbury decided to gather together to protest anyway. And no, they were not protesting shoplifting. They were not protesting the politicians who legalized it. They were not protesting their own community members who are victimizing these businesses and running them out of town. No, instead they were, of course, protesting Walgreens itself. Watch.
So this Walgreens is critical, not just to this community, but the surrounding communities and the seniors.
Walgreens is downsizing nationwide, telling us, quote, "When faced with the difficult decision to close a location, several factors are taken into account, including our existing footprint of stores, dynamics of the local market, and changes in the buying habits of our patients and customers, among other reasons. But after sitting in the parking lot observing for hours, I can tell you this location has a consistent stream of customers and sits next to a dialysis center."
As 300 people from Harvard Street Health Center that comes to this Walgreens in our community, that's elderly, that's parents.
This group says they'll continue to rally until Walgreens changes their mind. In Roxbury, I'm Tiffany Chan, WBZ News.
Now, we should point out CVS also announced that it's closing pharmacies inside Target stores. CVS says the closures will begin in February, so next month, and will be completed in April. We do not have a list of those pharmacies yet, but we're told there will be dozens nationwide.
So CBS does some investigative reporting in that segment, by which I mean their reporter sat in the parking lot for a little while and noticed a steady stream of customers at the Walgreens. And we're apparently supposed to conclude from this that the store is doing fine and has no reason to close. I mean, they saw people going in, and so that must mean everything. I mean, how could a business be doing poorly if there are people going inside of it? But the problem with shoplifting is that it's not that nobody goes in the store. It's that too many people go in the store and then don't pay. That's the issue. It's generally difficult to shoplift without physically entering the store. I'm sure criminals are working on a solution to that problem. I guess you could do like online scams and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, like if you want to shoplift an item that's on the rack at a certain store, you have to go in and do it, or you have to send someone else. It does require a physical presence in the store. But the reporter cannot explore that avenue, so instead they just decide that it must be racist. Never mind, of course, that the racism theory here makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, leave aside everything we know about the shoplifting problem. Like, what is the claim exactly? That Walgreens is actually making money at that location and everything is fine, but they're closing down anyway? and choosing to lose money just to spite black people? Like, is that actually what we're suggesting? Did the Walgreens CEO at some corporate meeting say, hey, shut down that location, Roxbury, shut it down? And somebody on the executive team said, but sir, they're turning huge profits. Their profits are up 25% in the last year. Well, I don't care. I don't want black people in my store. Shut it down. Like, is that the theory? Do you think that's what's happening? The theory is that Walgreens would rather close down a store than provide services to black people. If that's the case, you'll have to explain, I don't know, literally every other Walgreens location in the country that's still open, considering they all provide services to large numbers of black people. Which is why you might argue that of the two possible explanations, racism or shoplifting, the shoplifting one makes a lot more sense. But in fact, in their own statement, Walgreens itself couldn't really blame shoplifting either. They had to give some coded language about marketing, market dynamics and so forth. And that's a contrast to what we saw last year when Target shut down 9 stores, including its store on Folsom Street in San Francisco and 1 location in Harlem. And in that instance, Target explicitly blamed, quote, theft and organized retail crime, which are threatening the safety of our team and guests and contributing to unsustainable business performance. Now, after Target made that decision, various left-wing publications, including CNBC, attacked Target. They rushed to point out that Target was closing stores with relatively low reports of shoplifting compared to stores that Target was leaving open. And from this data point, we were supposed to conclude that Target was racist. Now, I'm not one to defend Target, and I don't really care if the whole company is shut down. And it should be, but for entirely different reasons, for the reasons of like sexualizing kids and all the degenerate, disgusting stuff that they sell. But, the racism charge, of course, is entirely absurd. Like, one of the problems with this analysis is that stores where shoplifting is common don't report it. So that led to a comical moment, for example, 2021, when a single Target store decided to start reporting shoplifting incidents, and that doubled the entire city's shoplifting rate in the month of an entire month. One day of reporting, or rather, one store reporting shoplifting incidents doubled the rate for the entire city, which shows you that prior to this they just weren't reporting it. So once again, the startling math works out the same. If you don't report something, then you will end up with fewer reports about the stuff you are not reporting. Imagine that. Now, none of this is compatible with social justice narratives, though, so you never hear about it. Now, stores like Walgreens have learned to just avoid mentioning organized theft entirely, but that has not appeased activists. They still want you to conclude that there is a vast conspiracy afoot among various pharmacies to pull out of black communities just to spite them. You're supposed to believe that this is why, in just the past 2 years, between Walgreens and Rite Aid and CVS, more than 1,500 stores have closed. They're all choosing to close profitable stores and lose money on purpose just out of their sheer hatred of their black customers. This is the actual thing that is being claimed. It's completely insane, but it's not just activists in Boston who are pushing this narrative. We're seeing this denial of reality everywhere, including San Francisco. And once again, the NAACP is involved. Watch.
Critical store. This is like the store for all the elderly in the neighborhood. They can walk over here. There's no stairs. Easy in, easy out.
It's not helping the black community. It's not helping the homeless. It's not helping us at all.
Tonight, it's the very real human cost of a neighborhood closure. The Safeway in San Francisco's Fillmore district is set to shut down, and the community says it's more than just a bag of groceries. Neighbors in the Fillmore and Western Addition neighborhoods are still angry tonight, saying if this plan goes through, it will have long-term negative implications on the city's black community. The announced closure for that store in the heart of the city on Webster Street came late last week. Tonight, ABC 7 News reporter J.R. Stone is hearing the calls from neighbors and community leaders and brings us this story.
In less than 2 months, this Safeway grocery store will close, according to executives.
You're gutting it. You're just gutting the neighborhood.
Community members are outraged, saying seniors and handicapped individuals have been forgotten about. Those with Safeway say they have entered into an agreement to sell the 3+ acre site to a real estate company for a mixed-use development project to include housing and commercial retail space.
They need to really do things about taking things from the inner city that we need, and then you're developing housing. Housing for who? The homeless? You need to do better than that.
It is a destruction of a community.
And those thoughts from Dr. Amos Brown of the NAACP are echoed by those that live in the Western Addition.
So they're going to get rid of the business and replace it with housing, probably because housing is a little tougher to steal, I guess. But once again, in that news report, there's not even a suggestion that San Francisco's policies might be to blame. And that's odd, given that San Francisco's policies mirror Boston's. According to NBC San Francisco, quote, under current state law, shoplifting merchandise valued under $950 is considered a misdemeanor and often not investigated. Could that be the issue, perhaps? Let's see. Chicago is another city that stopped prosecuting shoplifters unless they steal more than $1,000 worth of goods. And even then, cops aren't allowed to chase them. How are things going there? Well, last year, the mayor at the time, Lori Lightfoot, had to respond to Walmart's decision to pull out of the south side of Chicago. And you'll never guess what she said. Watch.
Walmart is moving out, closing half of its stores in Chicago, saying they haven't been profitable in 17 years and lose millions of dollars a year. Mayor Lightfoot calls the decision disappointing. In a statement released today, she wrote, in part, unceremoniously abandoning these neighborhoods will create barriers to basic needs for thousands of residents. While near-term arrangements will be made for workers, I fear that many will find that their long-term opportunities have been significantly diminished. And Southside elected officials are also responding, issuing a joint statement, and it reads in part, closing 4 stores in 5 days is unethical, especially since Walmart claims these stores have not been profitable since 2006. If Walmart cared about the community they belong to for nearly 2 decades, they would have implemented strategies to combat the rising prices, the likely root cause of their decline in earnings. The 4 stores being closed are the Chatham Supercenter Walmart and the neighborhood markets in Kenwood, Lakeview, and Little Village. Each store is slated to be closed by this Sunday.
It's really amazing just how unified the messaging has been on this issue going back years. This is nothing new. And still, there is no self-reflection at all. There's no accountability for the people who have actually made these communities into dead zones for businesses. These communities are actively destroying themselves, actively making their own neighborhoods untenable for businesses, unsafe for people to even walk down the street at night to go to a business, even if it is open. And they will look anywhere but in the mirror for people to blame for it. So the next time you hear complaints about food deserts or pharmacy deserts, keep in mind that this is what's causing the problem. It's a systemic issue plaguing every city that's implemented the bold experiment that Boston launched back in 2019. And they will also tell you it's a systemic issue, but what they're missing is that this is the systemic issue. So now one of 2 outcomes is possible. Either this experiment can finally end and we can enforce the law and people living in these black communities can get their prescriptions and their groceries, or these residents can continue to vote for politicians who will only make the problem progressively worse, who are promising to make it worse. And these communities can continue victimizing themselves by constantly pillaging and stealing from their own businesses until elderly women are quite literally dying in the streets because they can't get their medication. Those are the choices. It's clear what the NAACP and corporate press want. And unless these communities start taking some responsibility, that's exactly what they'll get. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.